Hey everyone, welcome to Left on Left, where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud to keep from crying. I'm Gloria Guillo, filling in for Craig Pasta-Jardula, who's on family leave. I'm a former bureaucrat in New York City government, an investigative journalist, vice chair at WBAI Radio, and a co-founder of Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement, a group so left, it's right on. I'm joined here today by our resident expert, Jayme Kuzmarov. Jayme is a professor at Tulsa Community College, a historian, investigative journalist, managing editor of Covert Action Magazine, an online magazine that focuses on CIA and deep state activity. We are live streaming so that Jayme CheeseSlice, our beloved producer engineer, says you can see how we make the sausage. It's all warts, folks. Our edited broadcasts can be found on WBAI 99.5, New York City Free Speech Radio, and on Gary Null's Progressive Radio Network. The opinions you hear are our own and not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. Take it away, Jayme, with today's topics.
Okay, well, we wanted to discuss today, and again, we're on the left, but we provide a critique of the Democratic Party and so-called liberal and alternative media, not from a position of a Trump supporter, but a position of people who support liberal principles and want to reinvigorate the left-wing movement in America, because we're very disturbed by what we see in the Democratic Party and so-called left more broadly. And I think we saw that in this election where a lot of voters turned against the Democrats. And these are, for reasons that we've been pointing out on this show since we started. And today we want to spotlight the race for Democratic Party chairman and the tenure of the previous chairman, Jayme Harrison. And I think this embodies, some of the problem we find as liberals with the Democratic Party, that this party, and it should be noted, I wrote books on Obama and Clinton that conveyed my disaffection with the basically rightward shift of the party when it comes to foreign policy issues and political economic issues, and the acquiescence to corporate power in America. And a key transition was the Clinton administration and his support for the new Democratic faction, or pro-corporate faction, with the decline of labor movements. I think Clinton courted large corporations and transformed the party into a more right-wing party away from its New Deal roots. And that's at the heart of the problem we see today. And this, we see this with the Democratic, chairman. The chairman, and we see how the Democrats have embraced identity politics and culture wars as a substitute for addressing class-based interests of working class Americans, and for trying to rein in the military-industrial complex. And we see that with the chairman, the DNC chairman for the last 4 years, Jayme Harrison, is an African-American from South Carolina, but he was part of the Jim Clyburn political machine in South Carolina, which is very conservative Democrats. So he may be African American, but he's adopting conservative economic policies and aligning with U.S. militarism and U.S. imperialism. And Clyburn, of course, is a big supporter of Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. And Harrison has a background working for the Podesta Group as a lobbyist for Bank of America, Walmart, Lockheed Martin, and he's bringing in a lot of corporate dollars into the Democratic Party. And that's why we see the outcome that we see, that we've discussed on this show, a party that is supporting a very hawkish foreign policy to the benefit of Wall Street and the military contractors, and a party that abandoned the working class and courts Wall Street. And we saw that in the Waltz-Harris campaign.
Jayme, one thing that you point out in your books and in your articles on Clinton and on Obama are their relationships to the CIA and their connections to various players in that sense. And there is a very close relationship between the CIA and defense military contractors. So
I think that's.
Could you talk about which contractors he lobbied for? And Why would either of these choices be disastrous? Who is talked about as the new DNC chair to succeed him?
Okay. Well, yeah, and this is part of this general pattern that we see. Yeah, and in the 60s and 70s, you had a backlash against the Vietnam War, and you had the rise of the countercultural movement of the 60s, and that led a lot of political figures to embrace more liberal policies, including efforts to rein in the CIA. So you had a faction within the Democratic Party in that era, led by George McGovern. And Fred Harris, who actually his obituary is in today's New York Times, he was the DNC chair in 1969, and he was against the Vietnam War, and he was from Oklahoma, where I live, the most conservative state now, but he adopted very liberal policies opposing the Vietnam War, calling for the abolishing of the CIA, and had a very strong domestic liberal record. And that contrasts, with the Clinton Obama, who are basically CIA Democrats. Well, both Clinton, I trace in my book that they both have deep ties to the CIA. Clinton going back to the 60s when he, according to Meyer Jr., was recruited into the CIA for a mission to travel to Russia as a student at Oxford to smuggle the memoir of Nikita Khrushchev with his roommate Strobe Talbot. And when he was governor of Arkansas, he oversaw a major CIA operation of arming the Nicaraguan Contras. And Obama has a family connection to the CIA. His grandfather and mother likely worked for the CIA. He worked for a CIA company after he graduated from Columbia University that provides investment assessment in countries around the world. And according to Leon Panetta, who gave a speech at this, the former CIA director under Obama, who gave a speech at this recent Democratic Party convention, Obama gave the CIA everything they wanted when he was president. And, we see a continuity now. These figures who are running the DNC, like Harrison, they have connection. Well, Harrison worked for the Podesta Group, and that was one of the top K Street lobbying firms, and they have their clients include some of the big defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, as well as Bank of America and Walmart. And now they're talking about Rahm Emanuel as a potential successor. He's one of the candidates to succeed Harrison, and Rahm Emanuel was Obama's right-hand man. And he was, there's a good book that I used to assign to students in one of my courses about him called Mayor 1% by Carrie Liderson. And it looks at his time as mayor of Chicago and how he was the mayor for the 1%, the wealthiest, the real estate developers and the wealthy in Chicago. And he screwed over the poor all the time. And that's what you get from these Obama, Clinton Democrats. And he was a neoconservative war hawk who was particularly hawkish with regard to Middle East policy. And his family is very tied with Israel and the right wing in Israel. So he's a hawk on Israel and Middle East policy and foreign policy in general. And he has deep ties with large corporation and the corporatist wing of the Democratic Party. And the other three candidates, I did some research on the three.
You wanted to talk about Debbie Wasserman Schultz.
Yeah, well, first,
I just want to say, she's one of the few people that fails upward. I mean, she was a Florida politician, in the Florida Senate, in the Florida, House, and then she becomes the DNC chair. And then now she's a congressperson. I mean, it's just incredible how she fails up. And she was involved in several scandals, the counting of votes in Florida, with the issues with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. And it's just, and then she goes on Hillary Clinton's campaign. It's just crazy how she fails upward. And now you wanted to talk a little bit about what she's saying about Tulsi Gabbard. And I just want to say I did work on Tulsi Gabbard's campaign when she was running for president. And she's a really amazing person. I mean, I personally object to her focusing so much on Islamic terrorism, because she omits the part that the Islamic terrorists were funded by the CIA and supported by the CIA. So she just focuses on kind of the end part. She doesn't focus on the beginning part when she goes into it. But, she's quite an amazing person and very intelligent, a very solid person. Take it away, Jeremy.
Okay, well, first I wanted to mention who's the other candidates are for the race for the next DNC chairman, and they all come from this kind of corporate, conservative background within the Democratic Party, which has led the party astray. From my point of view, these, beside Emmanuel, the race seems to be between Emmanuel Martin O'Malley, who is the governor of Maryland. And looking into his background, he supported zero tolerance policing strategy that led to abuses against the police brutality against African American. Basically, empowered the police, and he's kind of a law and order hawk, although he was against the death penalty. And he had a bad record, a thing like the environment. He vetoed a bill to clean up Chesapeake Bay. So, I mean, liberals embrace strong environmental policy, and yet you have these corporate Democrats. And, I did a detailed survey of Clinton's record as governor of Arkansas as a prelude to his presidency, and he had a horrific environmental record because he was tied with Tyson Chicken, for example, that was polluting Arkansas's rivers. And he refused to pass any legislation to regulate the chicken industry in Arkansas. And if you look at O'Malley's record, he has a very bad record as well on the environment, and he refused to pass these bills to clean up Chesapeake Bay. So that's what you get from these corporate Democrats. They stray from liberal values of supporting environmental cleanup and regulation because they're in the pockets of the big corporations. And that's what we're worried about on this show. And we want to reverse that trend. And the other candidates, there's Ken Martin, who is the DNC chairman in Minnesota, is up for the broader position. And he's tied with Tim Walz. He's very close with Tim Walz, who's the governor of Minnesota. And we've discussed Tim Walz and the problem with him on this show, that Tim Walz was a war hawk who backed all the wars. Tim Walz also went way overboard. Whatever he reviewed on the COVID issue, he went way overboard, even for those who might be sympathetic to the government position. He supported a snitch line that you should rat out your neighbor if he wasn't wearing a mask or was having a gathering in his home. I mean, almost nobody would favor a snitch line. And Walz is a big proponent of censorship, stifling any debate on the COVID issue and others. And even his run for vice presidency, he was supporting censorship to guard against disinformation, which we know is a code word for silencing critics of the government. So Ken Martin's tied with Tim Walz and this censorship regime and hawkish foreign policy. And the final candidate that seems to be up for it, Mitch Landrieu, who comes from a political dynasty in the state of Louisiana that's very tight with the oil and gas industry, and a very poor record on the environment. And in fact, Mary Landrieu, who is a senator, is now a lobbyist for a big oil company after she left office. And there were protesters. She was defending a pipeline construction. I read an article about this. And these protesters, New Orleans came out and said that you're a traitor. You sold us out. You're supposed to represent the public. And yet you're really, in the pay of these big oil companies. So these are not Democrat. These are really Republican. I mean, in the past, there was a distinction.
I think we have like two concepts that not to interrupt you, but there's two concepts that you're really bringing out. And I just want to make it very clear for our audience. And one of the concepts is conflict of interests. And, we really should focus on conflict of interests. And the other concept is corporate capture. And we should really focus on corporate capture. So when you're talking about these politicians, you're talking about the fact that they are all in with some industry, very often the military-industrial complex, or the stock exchange, something like that, or banking, they're all basically bought and paid for. So I think that's something that you could go and explain a little bit further.
Yes, and that's my point, that the Democrats used to be distinct from the Republicans as the party that had more support from labor unions and champion legislation to counter the power of large corporations. And that's why many people identify as liberals. They don't want a society dominated by corporations. But yeah, we've seen corporate capture in both parties, and this is reflected in this slate of candidates for the DNC chairman, and a much broader phenomenon going. I mean, it goes well before Clinton, but and there were always countervailing forces within the Democratic Party, but that liberal wing, that independent wing, had become much weaker today, and these corporate Democrats prevail, or CIA Democrats. And related to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, yeah, she's an example of that corporate CIA Democrat. And she appeared to be very corrupt. I mean, she was involved in the corrupt shenanigans in the 2016 election to undermine Bernie Sanders, who represents more. I mean, there are some problems with Sanders that we've identified on this show: his support for certain wars that were waged by the Democratic Party, his effort to channel progressive into the party, even these corporate candidates during elections. But on the other hand, Sanders does have some progressive policies, and far more than others. I mean, he's challenged corporate power. He was out there, trying to pass a bill to block our arms shipment to Israel.
Yeah, but he's a little too late. He was too little too late, really.
But in any event, he's better than a lot of the others. But Wasserman Schultz was involved in that a criminal plot against him. I mean, that was basically rigging the primary against Sanders, against the tradition of democracy, and it points to her corruption. Yeah, she's a conservative Democrat. She's from Florida. She's tied with the anti-Castro Cuban lobby. I did an article about her support for hawkish policy toward Cuba, pushing this devastating embargo on Cuba that devastated their economy, had horrific economic impact. And she supports aggressive foreign policy intervention throughout Latin America against leftist governments. And she's a big Russiagate hawk who has pushed this false narrative of Trump as a Russian agent, and is a staunch supporter of the huge weapon supplies to Ukraine. And that exemplifies how the Democrats have strayed from being a party of the working class and people in any way. They're willing to spend taxpayer dollar supporting a fascistic government in Ukraine that's provoking World War III, instead of helping the American people and developing more robust programs to improve the quality of life here in America. And I attended a hearing with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, where there are these FBI whistleblowers who are testifying about malfeasance, and they had been very badly treated within the FBI. And she accused them of being Russian agents. And this was right out of the playbook of Joseph McCarthy. And it was because one of the FBI whistleblowers gave one interview to Sputnik Radio. And so this was ridiculous, what she was claiming. And so she's really a nasty breed. And unfortunately, that's what we see in the Democrats today. And that's why there are people like us who are liberals, but disgusted by that party and how they behave, and some of these people dominating the party.
Well, as Jayme pointed out at our last show, Jayme CheeseSlice, our lovely producer and engineer, that it's really the Democrats and the Republicans have become the uniparty. And, there used to be, as Jeremy's saying, this distinction between the two parties, where one was more union-based and more working-class-based, and the other was more corporate and, more finance-based. And one was more anti-CIA and deep state, and the other one was more, military-industrial complex. And what we've seen is that really disappear. And we really do have a uniparty, and I have to agree with that. And I guess Jayme, you're agreeing with that too. It's like we don't have any party anymore that really represents the working people.
I generally agree. I mean, there's something that the Democrats are more favorable to working class interests, like the Biden administration was supporting overtime pay and had more progressive people on the labor board, and was raising corporate taxes, whereas Trump will cut them and make it easier to offshore money for the wealthy so they don't pay taxes. So there still are some differences, but in general, the Democrats have really abandoned the working class. And Sanders called them out after the election for this. They didn't follow through on some of their promises in the last election, like for 15 across the board $15 minimum wage, alleviation of student debt. And they're so Russia obsessed, and they diverted billion and billion of taxpayer resources into the war in Ukraine and into weapons for Ukraine and Israel, and also a huge military buildup in the Asia Pacific. And a true liberal, a Jordan McGovern liberal, Henry Wallace liberal, would call for huge cuts in the military budget so that money could be spent on social programs and building a truly great society at home. And that's what liberals should demand. And we don't have champions, certainly not in people like Debbie Wasserman Schultz, or these kind of people who are dominating the party.
Did you want to talk a little bit about what you were saying about Tulsi Gabbard?
Well, and Wasserman Schultz continued her McCarthyism when Gabbard was appointed as the new director of national intelligence. Wasserman Schultz accused her of being a Russian asset,
Crazy.
Which is absolutely baseless. And it is just this neo-McCarthyism. And this was because Gabbard advocated for diplomacy and better U.S. relations with the Russians and diffusing the conflict that's led in a very dangerous direction, as we've been discussing outside of the show. I mean, we're really under the precipice of nuclear war here.
Did you want to talk a little bit about
Gabbard has been a voice of sanity, and here you have Wasserman Schultz attacking her. And yeah, why don't you talk about the current situation in Russia and how dangerous it is?
If Jayme can pull up the Green Renaissance invite, Jayme. No, I think he took a break. All right. Well, 11/19, the United States fired, through Ukraine, of course, ATACMS and HIMARS into Russian territory. And the British fired Storm Shadows. And one of the things that Putin had said is that if they're attacked with NATO weapons or US weapons, that would be World War III, and he would respond. And it was extremely dangerous that they did that. And really on 11/19, a lot of us were freaking out. I'm sure maybe, people at home that are plugged into this were freaking out too on 11/19, waiting for the Russian response, waiting for really nuclear war to begin. And what happened instead, on 11/21, a few days later, Putin used Orshenik missiles, which are ballistic medium-range missiles. And this one particular missile, or Ornishenk, or Hazel, flies at Mach 10, which makes it impossible to stop. And he basically hit Ukraine with these particular missiles that had multiple warheads. And we have a really good video of it if we get Jayme back and he puts it on. Really good video of them hitting, and it is quite shocking. So really what happened is that we could have had World War III, but because of these weapons, this new technology that flies at Mach 10 that cannot be stopped, the United States and NATO backed down and stopped shooting at Russia. So we have peace at this moment, and I feel personally a sense of relief that Putin did this. And I found out some really interesting things. Putin had warned the United States and NATO that he was going to fire these missiles and that this was a new technology. And he told them that he wasn't going to arm them with a warhead. Oh, we're seeing the videos. Yay, Jayme. So you can kind of see how fast it goes. It's just amazing. So Putin warned, the United States and NATO that he was going to use these weapons, but he wasn't going to put nuclear warheads in them. Now, if he did put nuclear warheads in them, he would have basically taken out Ukraine and, escalated. But he didn't want to escalate. He just wanted to show what it is, they have that they can use. So I think that was, really handled very well on behalf of Russia, and we averted, a nuclear war. But the United States and NATO are just really provocative, and it is quite scary that they have as much control as they do.
And this is our point on the show, that the Democratic Party had been the most hawkish on Ukraine and obsessed with Russia for a decade now. And it's figured like Wasserman Schultz who've been driving this in this corporatist wing of the Democratic Party. And Bill Clinton and Barack Obama have come out supporting Ukraine. In fact, Obama can be considered the father of this war because his administration triggered a coup in Ukraine in February 2014, and he turned Ukraine into a CIA base to attack and destabilize Russia. And this war has caused over 1 million deaths. It's as bad a humanitarian crisis as Israel-Gaza. And I just hope these protesters who are fully justified in protesting the Israeli genocide in Gaza should expand their protest to also protest the horrific human rights abuses and atrocities that originated from Obama's criminal program to overthrow the legitimate Ukrainian government, set up Ukraine as a CIA base to attack Russia, and provoke a conflict that is potentially heading to World War III.
Okay, we're up to our 20-second spot, and I'd just like to thank our viewers for watching, and please stay with us. We're going to come back with the second part of our show. We are broadcasting live, showing you, warts and all, how to make the sausage. But these episodes will be edited for WBAI and for the Progressive News Network. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. That was good.
Okay, we're still on. We're still
all right.
live.
Yeah, we're still on. All right, Gloria.
Don't take the clothes off.
Gloria, when you're doing the show, just act like it's just the radio. Don't talk to the YouTube audience, and don't. We're just on radio, and don't think about, because I'm going to have to edit a lot of that stuff out where you're talking to the live stream and stuff like that.
Okay.
So, you're speaking to the radio audience for the recording, and then anything after that we can do for the live stream. Okay.
Okay.
Other than that, I think we went a little over, but that's okay. I started the clock late, so and I got to make some cuts. But all right, I'm ready to go whenever you are. Let me jump out. You just give me the signal for part 2.
Well, how much of an intro do you want from this? This is just, hey everybody, welcome to Left on Left.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, Pasta always does it as if it's a separate show every time.
Okay.
So they're always going to be 24-minute episodes.
Okay.
So
the whole spiel.
Yeah, the whole spiel. It's like a brand new show, that in case somebody is listening to them individually on the website or something like that. Because I think they put these up on the website, if I'm not mistaken. But
okay.
Yeah, so you could actually listen to these as a podcast, which we should be doing ourselves, by the way.
Okay.
That's a separate conversation. All right.
Okay.
Let's give you the signal when you're ready to go.
Okay, ready to go. Hey everyone, welcome to Left on Left, where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud to keep from crying. I'm Gloria Guillo, filling in for Craig Pasta-Jardula, who's on family leave. I'm a former bureaucrat in New York City government, an investigative journalist, vice chair at WBAI Radio, and a co-founder of Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement, a group so left, it's right on. I'm joined here today by our resident expert, Jayme Kuzmarov. Jayme is a professor at Tulsa Community College, a historian, investigative journalist, and managing editor of Covert Action Magazine, an online magazine that focuses on the CIA and deep state activity. The opinions you hear are our own and not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. Take it away, Jayme, with today's topic.
Great. Well, our segment today is going to focus on the JFK assassination, because this was the week of the 61st anniversary of the assassination, and its continued cover-up in the media, including liberal media. You find either a blackout on this topic or a failure to really probe into what really happened. And often even liberal media outlets will just accept the Warren Commission reports a false claim that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin of JFK, when a mountain of evidence has come to light to show that Oswald was set up as a patsy and that this was a coup d'etat. And if you want, I can go on with because I've done my own study, and I would like to thank Robert Morrow as a Texas-based investigator who has helped me to better understand what really unfolded there. And it should be noted that I've published articles about JFK that are very critical of JFK's foreign policy, but I believe that this was a coup d'etat spearheaded by Lyndon Johnson and elements in the CIA. And yeah, this week I published an article, LBJ insider D.H. Byrd and James Lang bought 132,000 shares of stock in defense contractor LTV in November 1963, around the time of the JFK assassination. And, the oil interest, JFK was pushing for the repeal of the oil depletion allowance, which was a tax subsidy that oil companies didn't have to pay taxes, basically, because it was claimed that it was a finite resource. And that's one reason Big Oil in Texas hated Kennedy. And they had attached themselves to Lyndon Johnson since the 1930s and saw him as a cash cow. So they wanted him in the White House. And Johnson was more of a cowboy. Kennedy favored more covert approaches to foreign policy intervention. Kennedy was not a pacifist by any stretch or anti-imperialist, and he was involved in a lot of dirty operation. But Johnson was more of a cowboy, and he expanded the Vietnam War massively. And there were a lot of Texas businessmen who profited massively off the Vietnam War, like Brown and Root. And Herman and George Brown were old friends of Lyndon Johnson. They were connected to the CIA, and they funded a lot of CIA front operations, and they built the major military bases in Vietnam. And D.H. Byrd owned the Texas School Book Depository, and he was an oil wildcatter who was an oil billionaire. Big Oil made a fortune off the Vietnam War because they sold oil to the U.S. military. And also, he had invested in these stocks in the.
Well, just slow down for 1 second. You talk about the textbooks to the schools in Dallas. Why was that important? It was also a front you put in your article for the CIA. They were also distributing intelligence materials in the book cartons, and that's also where Oswald was allegedly when he shot Kennedy, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, firstly, Oswald, the shot, and people should visit the Dealey Square Museum, which is in the Texas School Book Depository. It's now a museum. But the sniper's nest was on the 6th floor. But actually, Oswald was identified on the second, less than 2 minutes after the shots were fired. 2 witnesses, including Oswald's boss, identified him on the 2nd floor, calmly drinking a Coke. And that makes it impossible for him to have been the shooter, because it would have taken a long time for him to run from the 6th floor to the 2nd floor if he was the shooter, and he couldn't have been calm. And it would have taken a lot longer than 2 minutes, the way the building is set up. And Oswald, anyway, was a very poor shot in the military, and it would require an advanced sniper. And actually, the evidence indicate there were 2 bullets from the 6th floor sniper's nest, but now we have evidence of many more bullets, and that JFK was actually shot from the front and not the back, and that his autopsy was doctored, and they even tinkered with his body to cover up how he was shot, and that the shots came from the grassy knoll and from the Dow Tex building on the floor level, and that he was shot from the front. So this was an elaborate conspiracy.
But the other thing you wrote that I thought was really interesting was about how first of all, Byrd's relationship with Johnson, I thought was really interesting. And I didn't know about that relationship until I read your article, and, and saw how they benefited each other through various things. But one thing in particular kind of struck me is that he took out the window where, Oswald allegedly shot Kennedy, and he mounted it with all kinds of other paraphernalia in his home on his trophy wall. He was a big game hunter. So, I mean, come on, that is ridiculous. You're hanging a trophy of the death of a president next to the head of a buffalo. I mean, talk about putting your fingerprints all over it. So I thought that was a very interesting, thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was just a notch in their belt, and they were proud about it, and they didn't hide what they had done. They were very proud
Yeah.
that they got Kennedy. They hated Kennedy, and they stood to make a huge amount of money out of this. Byrd's company, LTV, produced Corsair flyers that had a significant role in Vietnam and got a lot of contracts. And yeah, Johnson was their cash cow. And Byrd also owned companies connected to the CIA. He owned E-Systems, which produced spyware, and then bought over Air America. So Byrd was a key liaison between Johnson and the CIA. And they made, in setting up Oswald as the patsy, they made sure to give him a job at the Texas School Book Depository, so they could monitor him on that day and set him up. And Johnson, his main motive was because Johnson was going to be dropped from the 1964 ticket by Kennedy. The Kennedys hated Johnson. The only reason they put him in as vice president is because J. Edgar Hoover, who lived near Johnson and was very close with Johnson, they had blackmail file on the Kennedys, all their sexual transgressions and sexual bacchanalia, and Hoover threatened to leak that to the media unless they selected Johnson as the vice president. But then the Kennedys were going to drop Johnson because two of his bagmen were under indictment. One was Billy Sol Estes, was a Texas cattle rancher who made a fortune in illicit dealings, and he was going to jail. But he was Johnson's top financial donor. And this looked bad for Johnson, that his top financial donor was going to prison for major corruption schemes. And there was also murder that Estes and Johnson may have been involved with together of a agricultural official named Henry Marshall, who had been investigating Estes's misdealings. And also Johnson had stolen to get in the U.S. Senate. See, Johnson was a very unprincipled man who stole the 1948 election for Senate in Texas, and he may have killed numerous people to cover up what he did. And then people were on to him, and he may have committed another murder of Henry Marshall. And the Kennedys had a big file. Robert Kennedy with the Attorney General, they had a thick file on Johnson and his criminal deeds. And also Johnson's top aide was Bobby Baker, who set up a brothel for senators in Washington. And he was also going to prison for a corruption scheme involving food machines, food dispensary. So this looked terrible for Johnson. This was hitting the media that Johnson's top aides were so corrupt. And the Kennedys had this thick file on Johnson's corruption and involvement even in political murders. And they were about to leak this to the media, to Life magazine. So Johnson, and they were going to drop him from the ticket, and Johnson may have gone to prison for the rest of his life. And Johnson said he was a gambler, and his only move at this point was to assassinate Kennedy. And he did it through his attorney, Ed Clark, who was given the ambassadorship to Australia, who owned, and he was given all these oil leases. And figures like Byrd, I think, were key to the coordination, because Byrd was tied in with the CIA and the owner of the School Book Depository.
Well, while I definitely agree in everything that you've written, that I've read, that Johnson is definitely the main protagonist in this, or I guess antagonist in this. When I started looking at the relationships between Johnson and other people, Johnson is linked to Bush, who's linked to Rockefeller, who's linked to Dulles, who's linked to Rockefeller. So then I started looking at what relationship does Lyndon Johnson have to Nelson Rockefeller, and they were really good friends. They really liked each other, and it's really kind of shocking, because a lot of what you wrote about that I wasn't aware of, how crude how crude Johnson was, how he would actually take dumps in front of people. He would take poops in front of people. He would have enemas in front of people. I mean, it was really pretty disgusting. And, and yet when you hear, Rockefeller describe him, he's he's this wonderful guy. So it's really quite interesting, and that relationship. And I don't know, there was some talk about Nelson Rockefeller running for president, and there was some tension between the Rockefellers and the Kennedys and stuff like that. So I think it's, while I definitely think Johnson was able to, do a lot for himself by being involved in this Kennedy plot. I think the plot was definitely a lot wider, and it included a lot more people who benefited from the assassination of John F. Kennedy besides him.
Yeah, well, on 2 points, yeah, with regard to Johnson, yeah, he displayed a psychopathic tendency even from a youth. As a youth, he blew up a stray dog in a town square in Johnson City, and his grandmother, that's a psychopath would do that, and his grandmother predicted he would be in jail. He was a bad kid, and yeah, he displayed ruthless tendency throughout his career. And, this is the guy who led the United States into the Vietnam War. He had no, compassion for other human beings. He was a Machiavellian operator. He stole elections in Texas. He killed people in Texas. And the Kennedys had a file on him. And, yeah, with regards to your point about broader networks, yes, I agree. There were broader interests that collaborated with Johnson, who hated the Kennedys for a variety of reasons. I think the CIA, elements in the CIA hated him in part because, not because, I think there's a misunderstanding among some people that Kennedy was some kind of pacifist or anti-imperialist, which he was not. I think the CIA hated him, because of the Bay of Pig. They wanted him to go more in on that and adopt air power to overthrow Castro, although that was really unrealistic. And the second reason, because Kennedy concentrated power in his brother in running U.S. foreign policy in Robert Kennedy, who, don't forget, was a very young guy. And so Kennedy set up the Special Group on Counterinsurgency to carry out U.S. counterinsurgency operations all around the world. That group was headed by Bobby Kennedy, and also had some Kennedy people like Maxwell Taylor, knew Alexis Johnson, but the CIA had a very limited presence on the Special Group on Counterinsurgency. And they want to run foreign policy, and they don't like this young Kennedy. They thought Bobby was very arrogant. They didn't like him running U.S. foreign policy and covert operations. But the Kennedys were zealous in supporting covert operations, but they concentrated power more away from the CIA. And that's a key reason the CIA wanted them dead, and elements who were involved. And we have evidence that Edward Lansdale, there's a picture that it looks like Edward Lansdale near Dealey Plaza right after the assassination. Edward Lansdale was a top CIA agent. Now, a reason he hated Kennedy was because Kennedy was involved in the assassination of Ngo Dinh Diem in South Vietnam, because they wanted to replace him with a more pliable U.S. client leader, and they realized his government was failing. But Lansdale was very close with Ngo Dinh Diem, so didn't like that move by the Kennedys. And also the Kennedys were pushing him out. He was a key figure in the CIA, but the Kennedys were pushing him out. And then when Johnson came in, Lansdale was appointed as a top counterinsurgency advisor again in Vietnam. So there were careerist reasons why Lansdale, and a personal vendetta against Kennedy, why Lansdale appears to have been implicated in the plot with others in the CIA.
You wanted to talk a little bit about Mary Meyer and how her death was linked to the JFK assassination.
Yes, and it's often not discussed that to cover up the JFK murder, many other people got murdered. And we've had some discussion on this show, including a journalist named Dorothy Kilgallen. And Mary Meyer was the wife of CIA agent Cord Meyer Jr., although she divorced him. And she was having an affair with Kennedy and allegedly experimented with LSD. And she had a diary, and she may have amassed insider information about the JFK assassination. And then she was murdered about a year and a half after the JFK assassination while going out on a daily jog by the Potomac River. And it was an elaborate setup, and the person fingered for the murder got off on trial. And the evidence, it was clearly he was set up, and they didn't have enough evidence to convict him. And then after Meyer was asked before he died who killed his ex-wife, and he said, quote, "the same sons of bitches that killed John F. Kennedy." And then James Angleton, it's been documented that the legendary CIA operative, after Mary's death, he went to her home and seized her diary, and I think destroyed the diary, which had incriminating information. Now, there are all kinds of question marks about Mary Meyer. Some believe that she was a good woman who's trying to use LSD because Mary Meyer had done some LSD experimentation with Timothy Leary, the famous LSD guru. And, is one theory is that she was trying to get Kennedy to become more of a pacifist because she had a liberal background. She was an artist, and apparently she criticized the CIA at cocktail parties and mocked her husband. And that may have been one reason she divorced him. That Meyer had been idealistic in his youth, but then joined the CIA and devoted his life to it. And she would mock the agency and all the evil thing they did, and thought her husband sold his soul. And Meyer had been a great writer and been involved with efforts to strengthen the United Nations and promote world peace before he joined the CIA. Now, the other darker theory is that Mary Meyer was part of the MK Ultra, that since she was married to Meyer Jr., she was associated with MK Ultra, and that and Timothy Leary may have been also in the CIA. He actually developed personality tests that were used by the CIA. He had a lot of CIA associates, and there's the theory that the CIA pushed LSD on the counterculture to divert them from serious political activism into kind of la-la land, where they just went off and had trips and had no meaningful impact on the politics of the country. And many destroyed their mind and fried their brains with drugs. So there's allegation that Leary was actually a CIA asset, and that the two of them worked together diabolically in the Operation MK Ultra, and that JFK may have been a victim of MK Ultra, that she gave him LSD, and that they were trying to get him to divulge information. Because don't forget that LSD was conceived as this magic drug by the CIA that could get people to talk in interrogation. They thought the Chinese and North Korean were brainwashing people, and they wanted to develop a drug that could do the same. They could brainwash, cap them, and get them to reveal information. So it's possible that she slipped LSD to Kennedy, and that Kennedy was a victim, even though he was in the White House, of MK Ultra, and that's why Mary Meyer was killed, and Angleton had to seize the diary because she was recording what she was doing with Leary and her involvement in illegal, unethical, criminal MK Ultra operations, and she had to be killed.
We see that all the time. I mean,
yeah.
You do a lot on assassinations, and it's very common for the person who does the assassination or who is involved in the assassination for them all to wind up dead. So it's not unusual.
Yeah, well, I'm developing a book called Political Assassination as American as Cherry Pie. And, it refutes the myth that political assassinations occur only in Russia or Japan. In fact, I quote, at the Warren Commission, Alan Dulles had every member of that commission read this book by a guy named Donovan that presented this theory that all assassins in American history were lone nuts, and that it's only in Russia and Japan or China that political assassinations occur. And it's this idea of American exceptionalism, and this book totally refutes that. That's obviously the view the CIA wants you to believe, and every time there's an assassination or assassination attempt, it's just this lone, deranged person, and there's no coordinated political plots, and we have a model democracy. But in fact, I trace a long history of assassinations and cover-ups, conspiracies and elite.
I wish you could read that paragraph that you found and you put in your article, which I really enjoyed. It was the actual memo from the CIA talking about using conspiracy theory to take heat away from the Kennedy assassination and to divert the public. It's in your article. If you could read that.
And then after, so they had every member of the Warren Commission read this book. that presented the claim that all assassinations in American history were by lone nuts, and there was never any political plotting. And then after they pushed this memo and sent it to their media operatives, that to call as conspiracy theorists anybody who questioned the idea that there was a broader plot in the Kennedy assassination, and that anyone who challenged the idea of Oswald as the main shooter, and that Oswald was some kind of lone nut, should be called a conspiracy theorist in a negative way. And that was the beginning of what we could consider a new McCarthyism, because now anybody who questioned official narratives, whether about assassination, whether about 9/11, COVID, they're blacklisted and called conspiracy theorists, like in the McCarthy era. They can't get academic job. They can't teach this in schools. They can't, as journalists, carry out what journalists do and try and investigate and weigh evidence, weigh different theories, like I was saying in the Mary Meyer case. But I guess they would call me a conspiracy theorist. I mean, they'd throw me out of schools, and that has happened to me before. So, this is the new McCarthyism, and it comes from the CIA. But they're covering up the truth about American history and American politics, that America is not an exceptional nation, that it has the same kind of plotting and intrigue and violence behind the scenes as other countries. And I think that delegitimized the American empire and this idea that America is going out to spread democracy, because when you question the idea that we don't have a model democracy here, that power changes through violence very often here, there's no legitimacy to going out and spreading our democracy in other countries. So I think that's why they suppress knowledge about these assassinations. And there's so many of them that I go into in my book, including, James Forrestal, the first defense secretary, was clearly assassinated. Vince Foster was assassinated. Often, it's people who had information that they were going to leak to destroy political leaders. Then they would be assassinated by leaders protecting themselves. Or in the Kennedy case, clearly is a coup d'etat Johnson carried out. And it was not a peaceful transfer of power. And Johnson was a horrible president who orchestrated the Vietnam War.
Jayme, did you ever get into Tavistock? I've done some research on that, and it kind of upset me. I used to have a rock band, and I really enjoyed rock music. And when I started studying Tavistock and the CIA and MK Ultra and all that stuff, Tavistock is in England. It's in London, and it's like one of these centers. And Freud was there, and Freud's, I think, nephew, who was like one of the first madmen for the advertising industry, and all the rock musicians, and the whole concept of sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of goes into this whole concept of LSD and really disarming people by creating mental illness, by creating dissociative disorders, by creating psychosis, and then controlling all of the messaging. So that, you had situations where, like, you had the Beatles and they were saying they were bigger than Jesus. And, the CIA clearly recognized the power of advertisement and the power of Hollywood and the power of the music industry over the youth, and how important it is to control messages. And there was a big, kind of revolving thing between drug use and rehab and institutionalization and things like that.
Yeah, if I could just in, because
I was just upset when I found out all this. I thought, oh gee, I was clever when I was a kid, but no, I was being brainwashed.
Well, yeah, see, this movement, and it relates back to our earlier discussion, the 60s movements were transforming American politics, and liberal politicians emerged like McGovern and Fred Harris, calling for abolishing the CIA. Come Home America was McGovern's platform. So they wanted to break up that movement because it was changing things in favor of a broader democracy and more peace-oriented foreign policy, what the elites don't want. So they pushed drug, and that's why Leary may have been a key asset of the CIA. They diverted people into drug use that was just self-destructive and narcissistic, and that destroyed those movements over time. And that was the goal of the CIA and the power elite that they represented.
With Charlie Manson, I think either you've written it or Covert Action has done some articles on Charlie Manson and his relationship with Spahn Ranch and the CIA. And then there's all kinds of stuff in California with that valley. I forgot the name of the valley.
Yeah, I have an article coming out on the Symbionese Liberation Army. They supported these ultra-radical factions that engaged in counterproductive forms of protest to alienate the public and bombings. And most of them were agents provocateurs. And it was designed to destroy the left, just like these efforts to push drugs on the left, so that it would not be an effective left movement. And that's where we get from point A to point B, from Democrats and a move in the political system toward more pacifism, toward confronting the CIA, to today's bleak political landscape where even the Democrats are bought off. And you have these figures running the DNC who are pro-CIA, pro-militarism around the globe, and abandon working Americans.
Well, that wraps up our show for today. And I'd like to thank Jeremy and Jayme and all of our listeners for being with us on our show. And we hope to see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Great. Sorry to cut you off, but I got 20 seconds flashing, so I was like, I wanted to end on that point. So.
Yeah.
I've been holding back some coughing fits. I'm still not 100%.
Right. We got to get you to start using that mute button there. There's if you look on your little box at the bottom, there's a little microphone. You can click on that and it'll mute you.
Okay.
Yeah. So we went a couple minutes over, but I can fix that.
But if you can get in those last points I made, because it kind of
the beginning. I try not to cut any of the content.
Okay.
So I will cut out the you knows and the ums and the dead space and stuff like that. So,
okay. Well, good job, Gloria. That was
thank you.
Overall, a good discussion for both segments.
Fun. Thanks to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. The JFK stuff's always interesting. I mean,
definitely.
For 30 years. And I think the majority.
Thanks for putting up that image. That was good of Lansdale. You found that. Yeah.
I think the majority of people in America now do not believe that he was killed by a lone gunman. I think they don't believe the Warren Commission.
Jeremy wanted me to actually ask him was that, why does the left hold on to this one bullet idea? I mean, like, you cannot get the left away from this,
It's the official narrative. Really odd. They believe the CIA is good, and that they are looking out for the American people, and they wouldn't lie to us. That's just the perception.
It's not how it used to be, but the JFK research used to be in these left-wing alternative magazines, but including Covert Action magazine, or Covert Action Quarterly, but. Yeah, now it seemed like Fox News picked it up, and it's more on the right that they are exploring that. So,
I think though the sentiment I get, I don't know anybody who believes the official narrative about the JFK assassination anymore. And if you ever talk to
anybody on Democracy Now, and they will tell you.
Maybe on corporate news they're going to stick.
Yeah, in academia, if you bring that up, you'll lose your tenure. You'll be fired.
Oh, really? Just question it?
Jimmy, you don't hang around with the the fake left like we do.
A casual conversation. You go to a bar, you talk to
anybody. Most people don't believe it.
They're going to say, it wasn't Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, exactly.
Garbage.
Well, it makes you wonder why, something like Democracy Now would, still hold on to this concept.
Because their funding's probably threatened if they don't repeat the narrative.
Exactly.
That's probably what it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, you're being paid to think the wrong thing or to say the wrong thing.
That goes back to our words for today, which are our big words for today are corporate capture and conflict of interest.
Yeah, that was good.
These are our buzzwords for today.
Exactly.
Very much so. All right, Jeremy, I know you got to run.
Yeah, I got to run. So thanks, guys. Great show. And I think we should have a meeting about how we could promote our show, because I think there'd be a lot of interest in our show. We can really expand our followers and start to make some money off it. So I think we should set up a meeting about promotional strategies.
Yeah, I think. Well, we got to do it. I mean, what we're
We're
talking
still,
about.
we're still live,
live
though.
audience.
Yeah, we're still live.
Oh,
We-
okay.
we-
All right.
we've been
Send some
doing this
money, guys.
LOL.
If you're listening to this, send some money.
Yeah, but
We can't pay our bills. We can't pay our bills.
we've been doing this show for like over 6 months now. This is, I think, about the 60th episode that we've done, and we had funding when we started, but we don't have funding anymore, and we haven't had funding for a few months. So we started out actually doing these episodes and having them so they were so that they were actually done individually and put up on Rumble, but we lost the funding and just couldn't keep doing that. So now there's talk about maybe we should go back and retrofit the entire series and put it all on.
I've got to sign off, guys. I got some
All right,
Let's aim for a meeting next week when
Well,
Pat's
Okay.
free.
Thank
We'll chat
you.
about that.
Let's
Thanks.
try and set up a meeting maybe
Bye,
next
everybody.
Monday or sometime next week.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. Bye, Gloria. And you got to go too.
Yeah,
So
I got to run. So
I'll just wrap up
thanks,
the show.
Jayme. You're doing a great job. Really appreciate it. So
Oh, no,
yeah, we
appreciate
got
you
to
guys
be able
too.
to compensate you more too. So
You guys are doing the heavy lifting here and getting getting all the content out there. Your work is amazing, Jeremy.
thank you.
I just can't believe how like you just churn this stuff out like crazy, and it's just
Yeah.
article after article after article, and you got a book on top of it. That's
Yeah.
pretty amazing.
Thank you.
So I mean I don't think I
I
could.
work a lot of hours, so I don't. Yeah.
I bet you do. I bet you do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you get
All right.
going. You know you got a meeting, so go
Yeah.
go.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Be in touch soon. Bye bye.
All right, everybody. That you've been listening to LOL today. I am Jayme CheeseSlice, the engineer producer for Pasta to Go. Pasta will be back hopefully next week. Also, I wanted to bring up one more thing before I sign off. If you're watching this, Scott Ritter is pretty upset about what's going on with the missiles flying over Ukraine and Russia right now. And being a former weapons inspector, he thinks that like we're on the verge of nuclear war. And I happen to agree with him. I think he's absolutely right. And what he is trying to do right now is set up a rally of sorts in Washington, D.C. to be against the proliferation of nuclear war in World War III. Because what we see right now going on is they're just trying to rush us into a World War III scenario before Donald Trump takes office. So if you can get to Washington, D.C., I think it's going to be on December 7th. They're going to be a big rally. It's actually going to be an indoor at a convention center, from what I hear. I've thrown my name into the hat of people to volunteer for this event. I think it's very important. We need to raise awareness, not only raise awareness, but try to get the attention of Congress and have them put a stop to all these neocons that are pushing for this war. And what we want to do is just say, hey, this is the risk of nuclear war. I mean, you don't win a nuclear war. At best, you have a Pyrrhic victory and everybody dies. So we want to stop that. And there's going to be a big rally on December 7th in Washington, D.C. I don't have any more details than that, but they're coming very shortly, very soon. And keep a lookout for it. You're probably going to hear about it on some of the other shows you watch. If you watch Garland Nixon, you watch Due Dissidents, RBN, Hardlands Media, Jamal Thomas, all these different people. And I'm leaving out a ton of people who could be talking about this, but you'll probably see it on their YouTube shows as well. And follow that. It's less than 2 weeks from now, but we don't have a lot of time because missiles are already flying. And the only thing that's stopping it from getting worse is that Putin has a very, very level head. And I think everybody's just trying to hold out for January 20th because we'll have new leadership in place. But in the meantime, we got to do something to put pressure on these people to make them stop and chill out and have cooler heads, because we do not want nuclear war. So please pay attention and look for that. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys for tuning in and watching us do our recording of Left on Left, where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud to keep from crying. So on behalf of Pasta, I'm CheeseSlice. And it's time for CheeseSlice to go this way, whichever way. Anyway, have a good one, guys. Bye-bye. Bye.